So as you know, I've been reading your drafts, I've been meeting with you, talking them through, conferencing with you. And as I've looked at some of your drafts, I've really noticed a pattern. So today's lesson is in response to that pattern. And it's about creative thinking in your research writing. So as a researcher, you have immersed yourself in the best sources you could find. Now as a writer, you want to curate those highlights, right? Curate, just like a museum curates artifacts or curates artworks, right? Organizes them in a way to engage the audience. Now, I think an analogy that might be useful for us at this point is that of a DJ. You're a little bit like a DJ right now, research DJ. So a DJ, if you think about it, a DJ has to have deep knowledge about the subject, right? About the music, about the genres of music that they're in. You have to have deep knowledge about the subject of your research. A DJ, though, also has, obviously, creative thinking. And the DJ's creative thinking comes through in the combinations, the juxtapositions. They're essentially creating something new using existing works in new ways, in innovative ways. And you're doing the same thing, right? So you've collected different details, perspectives, and ideas from your research. Now you're kind of doing that creative thinking of how do I present these ideas in a way that can engage my audience. And a DJ, of course, always will have an awareness of audience, and the same will be true for you. So these are the three things that you need as you pull together and revise your draft. Now, the assumption I noticed in the student writing that I'm looking at, and your writing is, it seems like some of you have this idea in your mind that you must always begin with the general, the big idea, and then proceed to the specific. So today I want to look at a couple of mentor texts, a couple of chapters from great writers, and sort of complicate that a little bit and suggest some alternative ways of approaching this. So the first book that we will look at is here, How to Rig an Election. Very exciting work of political intrigue by a couple of academics. And we're going to jump directly to chapter 2. So they're writing about politics, obviously, as you can tell from the title. And you can see the title of the chapter, Buying Hearts and Minds, The Art of Electoral Bribery. How does the chapter begin? Because that's your question, right? How do you begin your chapter? Let's read this together. On 22 April 2013, President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda calmly walked on stage to address a crowd of thousands who had gathered in the Busoga region in the southwest of the country near the source of the Nile. To audible gasps, he announced that he had come to make a donation of $100,000 to a local youth group. As the crowd went wild, a member of the security forces came forward with a large white sack containing the cash, which Museveni proceeded to hand over to a member of the Busoga Youth Forum, who struggled under its weight as he carried it away. So the big thing I want you to notice here is that the writer begins in a particular moment, a particular example, before zooming out to a more general idea, which will be developed. You notice this this footnote here too, right? These are academics. So these writers were not there as this happened, right? This is the detail from their research, and they lead with that detail. They start us in a specific moment, and then they're going to pull back and make some argument, which you can probably infer about electoral bribery, right? Okay, so here's an example where the writers begin in a moment and then pull back out to a more general idea. That is a way that you can work with your chapter as well. Next book on our list, this work, which won a Pulitzer Prize by Stephen Greenblatt, an academic as well, The Swerve. And it is sort of about the advent of modernism. You see the title, The Swerve, and then the subtitle, How the World Became Modern, right? By the way, that last book, that was a book that was given to me for my birthday last year. So how cool. Irrelevant, but whatever. The Swerve, right? So let's take a look at chapter 9 from Greenblatt's work. Now Greenblatt, if he's writing about how the world became modern, we're dealing in some history, right? Much of this work takes place in the ancient world. And we see this name Lucretius. Sounds like a very ancient kind of name, right? Lucretius has not yet come back to me. Poggio, I guess Poggio, wrote to his Venetian friend, the patrician humanist Francesco Barbero, although he had been copied. Evidently then, Poggio had not been allowed to borrow the ancient manuscript, which he characteristically referred to as if it were the poet itself, and take it back to Constance with him. The monks must have been too wary for that, and forced him instead to find someone to make a copy. He did not expect this scribe to deliver the result, important as it was, in person. The place is rather far away, and not many people come from there, Poggio wrote, and so I shall wait until some people turn up who will bring him. How long would he be willing to wait? If no one comes, he assured his friend, I shall put public duties ahead of private needs. A very strange remark, for what is public here and what is private? Poggio was perhaps telling Barbero not to worry. Official duties in Constance, wherever that might be, would not stand in the way of getting his hands on Lucretius. Okay, so what do I notice here? I notice that again, this writer is beginning in a specific moment, right? Whereas in the first example, we had a current event. Here we have a kind of historical moment. And you'll notice that this actually begins with a quote, right? A quote that this writer, Greenblatt, came across in his research because it was written by this guy Poggio a long time ago in the ancient world, ancient Rome, I think, if I remember correctly. Right? So here, Greenblatt is presenting something he found in his research, but notice that his mind is engaged creatively to present this in a way where something is very remote, literally from the ancient world, but it feels like it's happening in front of you, right? That's the creative thinking and the awareness on the awareness of audience that we're trying to imitate, that we're trying to learn, right? So specific moment, dialogue. Here I'm struck by how the writer takes something that is remote as ancient Rome, and makes it feel immediate. Now, your subject of research is also, in a way, very remote, right? It's inaccessible in a different way than Greenblatt's, but it's inaccessible to your readers, and your challenge is to make that inaccessible thing feel immediate, right? Yes. Next book. This guy right here. Notice this book is the title, everything is upside down. And the title is But What If We're Wrong by Chuck Klosterman. Now, Klosterman is a kind of an arts columnist. He's a journalist. So he's a researcher like you. He's writing for a popular audience. He's not an academic. And, that might be important. I don't know. But let's jump in. This is page 223, which is sort of 2/3, 3/4 of the way through his book. And it's the beginning of a chapter. So what's Klosterman doing here? When John Horgman published his book, The End of Science, in 1996, he'd been a staff writer for Scientific American for 10 years. A year later, he was fired from the magazine. According to Horgan, his employers suggested his book had caused a downturn in advertising revenue. This claim seems implausible until you hear Horgan's own description of what his book proposed. My argument in The End of Science is that science is a victim of its own success, he tells me from his home in Hoboken. Science discovers certain things, and then it has to go on to the next thing. So we have heliocentrism and the discovery of gravity and the fundamental forces, atoms and electrons and all that shit, evolution and DNA-based genetics. But then we get to the frontier of science, where there is still a lot left to discover. And some of those things we may never discover, and a lot of the things we are going to discover are just elaborations on what we discovered in the past. They are not that exciting. My belief is that the prospect for really surprising insights into nature is over, and the hope for future revolutionary discoveries is pretty much done. I became a science journalist because I thought science was the coolest thing that humans have ever done. So if you believe the most important thing about life is the pursuit of knowledge, what does it mean if that's over? Wow. In not very many words, this writer, Klosterman, really brings us into some important questions. But what are the moves he's making? Well, again, we see again that Klosterman begins his chapter in a particularly compelling moment, okay, which he came across in his research. Now, as a journalist, this research was more primary research, right? Whereas Greenblatt is looking at letters from ancient Rome, Klosterman is talking to a writer who got fired from the Scientific American, right? But it's still research, and the chapter begins with a particularly compelling detail or moment from that research. And like we've seen elsewhere, we see here Klosterman using this as a springboard for bigger questions. And that's a technique that you can use as well. Now, I want you to also note in this example the discussion of this moment, right? You can see Klosterman's thinking, response, reaction, wonderings, curiosity, and critical thinking about what's happening. So he's not just reporting what the Scientific American, what the writer for the Scientific American said, right? But he's actually his ideas are there. This claim seems implausible, right? Now we have. That's an example of Klosterman thinking about what he's hearing. He's not just reporting it to us, right? And on our rubric for evaluation, we're calling that discussion and analysis, right? So you can see an example of what that looks like in Klosterman's writing here. Beyond that, though, so that we have the critical thinking that's necessary to this kind of writing, but then we also have the choice to organize the chapter in this way. Reflects creative thinking and an awareness of audience. So that kind of, we've selected details, but then the way we organize them, again, we go back to that analogy of a DJ, those choices are really all about audience. Final example, and this is from a work that we've read from before, but it's a different chapter. This is Harari's book, Sapiens, widely celebrated, and we're starting out in chapter 16, page 305. The capitalist creed, what's Harari doing here? Money has been essential both for building empires and for promoting science. But is money the ultimate goal of these undertakings, or perhaps just a dangerous necessity? Now, this is the second time we've seen a writer in this lesson, articulate the questions that these facts or ideas raise for them. Can be a really effective thing to do. But is money the ultimate goal of these happenings, or perhaps just a dangerous necessity? It is not easy to grasp the true role of economics in modern history. Whole volumes have been written about how money founded states and ruined them, opened new horizons and enslaved millions, moved the wheels of industry and drove hundreds of species into extinction. Yet to understand modern economic history, you really need to understand just a single word. The word is growth. Look at that beautiful little short sentence. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, the modern economy has been growing like a hormone-soused teenager. It eats up everything it can find and puts on inches faster than you can count. And I'm gonna stop there. As I said, Harari identifies questions that these ideas raise for him, and that question suggests a focus for the chapter. Harari, he does something else in this paragraph that's so beautiful. He acknowledges the complexity of the subject being economics, right, and history, economics. He acknowledges the complexity of the subject, right? What does he say? It's not easy to grasp the true nature of economics. Volumes have been written, right? He acknowledges that complexity, and then creative thinking, creatively simplifies it to one word, growth. And, he takes that further with this hormone-soused teenager. Now that is creative thinking. The IB gives us these creative thinking skills. This is from the IB, and they talk about generating metaphors and analogies. That's a creative act, and Harari is doing that here. Now, like a hormone-soused teenager, it eats up everything it can find and puts on inches faster than you can count. He generates that metaphor. That's great. Now, notice in the next chapter, which we didn't read, he gets into some numbers as well. Right? So it's not just making things up. Here we even have a footnote, right, where those numbers come from. Harari is an academic, so he's using that convention for us. We're using in-text citations, but we see here, this is the second time we're seeing footnotes. Right, so you have for you here an idea of the creative thinking skills from the IB that might serve you well as you do this work, and the handout is shared on Google Classroom.